It is a deeply isolating internal crisis that plagues some of the most competent, hard-working adults. You have spent years studying, sacrificing, and executing your professional duties at an elite level. On paper, your success is undeniable. You have received promotions, earned accolades, and secured the explicit respect of your peers. Yet, the literal second you achieve a major milestone or receive a wave of public praise, a cold, suffocating feeling of absolute fraudulence settles into your chest. Instead of feeling proud or secure, your brain instantly convinces you that you are an impostor. You live in a constant state of low-grade terror, deeply believing that your success is merely the result of pure luck, perfect timing, or a massive administrative mistake. You assume that at any moment, the people around you will finally open their eyes, look past your credentials, and expose you as a complete amateur. Most people look at this persistent self-doubt and label it as a simple lack of confidence or a standard case of low self-esteem. They assume that if they just work harder or achieve one more goal, the feeling will finally disappear. But the reality behind this exhausting mental state has nothing to do with your actual competence or your humility. What you are experiencing is a profound architectural misalignment inside your brain's memory networks. Your mind is not failing, it is simply trapped in a severe cognitive sorting error. To understand why your brain treats your greatest victories as an immediate threat, we have to look past your achievements and dissect the neural pathways of self-attribution. To decipher the origin of this internal fraudulence, we must track the exact neurological mechanism through which the human brain processes feedback from the outside world. When you complete a task or receive praise, your brain is forced to perform a cognitive calculation known as causal attribution. It must instantly determine why the positive outcome occurred, assigning the cause to either internal factors, like your skill and effort, or external factors, like luck and easy circumstances. In a healthy, balanced brain, this process is governed by a network called the reward circuit, heavily anchored in the ventral striatum and the prefrontal cortex. When you succeed, these regions fire a calculated burst of dopamine, signaling to your memory networks that your personal effort was the direct driver of the victory. This reinforces your internal sense of agency. However, when your nervous system is exposed to chronic, early life pressure or rigid performance expectations, this reward circuit undergoes a severe functional shift. The brain stops connecting your internal effort with the external reward. When success occurs, the ventral striatum fails to fire its stabilizing chemical baseline. The brain receives the external reward, but because it lacks the internal neurochemical confirmation, it completely rejects the victory, categorizing your success as a random external anomaly rather than a reflection of your true capability. The true psychological gridlock of the imposter mechanism is driven by a powerful psychological law known as cognitive consistency theory. This law dictates that the human brain operates as an economy of information, meaning it will go to extreme lengths to ensure that its current thoughts, beliefs, and self-identity match its past experiences. Your mind holds a deeply ingrained internal narrative about who you are, constructed over decades of lived experience. If your internal self-narrative tells you that you are fundamentally flawed, average, or unworthy of elite spaces, that belief becomes your baseline reality. When you achieve a massive external success that violently contradicts this low self-image, it creates an immediate state of acute cognitive dissonance. The brain perceives this contradiction not as a positive event, but as a severe threat to its psychological equilibrium. To resolve the painful tension between your external reality and your internal identity, your brain must choose between two options. It can either completely rewrite its entire identity, which requires an immense amount of metabolic energy, or it can simply disqualify the external success. Operating on the law of least effort, the brain instantly chooses to disqualify the victory. It invents the narrative that you are a clever fraud who simply fooled everyone, completely protecting your negative self-identity from being disrupted by positive evidence. This ongoing disqualification of success is further weaponized by a profound biological imbalance in how your brain stores autobiographical memories. Human beings possess a natural neurological phenomenon called the fading affect bias, which is designed to strip the intense emotional charge from negative memories over time, while preserving the positive emotions of past victories. However, in individuals trapped inside the imposter mechanism, this memory processing system operates in complete reverse. The brain's hippocampus, which acts as the central filing cabinet for your life events, operates under the tight control of a hyperreactive amygdala. When you experience a failure or a mistake, no matter how small, the amygdala labels the event as a severe survival threat, burning it into your neural pathways with absolute permanent vividness. In contrast, when you achieve a massive success, the brain processes it without any emotional intensity. Over time, your mind actively downplays and erases the detailed memories of your competence, while keeping a flawless, high-resolution archive of your mistakes. When you look back at your career to evaluate whether you belong in your current position, your brain runs an entirely rigged data search. It presents you with a mountain of vivid historical evidence of your flaws, while presenting almost zero structural memory of your triumphs, forcing you to conclude that your current elevated status is an unearned delusion. The immediate physical consequence of living with this rigged memory archive is a chronic, low-grade activation of your autonomic nervous system known as performance hypervigilance, because your brain genuinely believes that your success is an unearned fluke. It views your current professional position as an unstable, dangerous cliff. The amygdala treats the potential threat of being exposed as a fraud with the exact same biological urgency as a physical predator. It continuously floods your bloodstream with microdoses of cortisol and noradrenaline, keeping your sympathetic nervous system locked on high alert. This creates a severe behavioral trap. To prevent the imagined exposure from happening, your brain forces you into one of two extreme coping mechanisms: over-preparation or self-sabotaging avoidance. You either work 80 hours a week, meticulously checking every comma to ensure flawless execution, or you procrastinate until the final second to give yourself an excuse if you fail. If you over-prepare and succeed again, your brain does not learn that you are capable. Instead, it concludes that the only reason you weren't exposed was because you worked yourself to the point of absolute exhaustion. The success reinforces the panic, turning your career into an ongoing, unsustainable cycle of biological dread, where every victory simply raises the stakes for your next inevitable collapse. To fully comprehend the mechanics of this psychological trap, we must look at how the imposter mechanism completely hijacks your brain's selective attention filters. Located in your brainstem is a network of neurons called the reticular activating system, or the RIS. The primary function of the RIS is to act as a data filter, deciding which pieces of environmental information are allowed to enter your conscious awareness and which are discarded as background noise. The RIS takes its filtering instructions directly from your core beliefs. If your core belief is that you are an unqualified amateur who has merely been lucky, your RIS will actively scan your environment for any data point that confirms this narrative. When a superior offers you constructive feedback on a minor detail, your filtered attention amplifies that critique into proof of your total incompetence. Conversely, when the same superior praises 95% of your work, your brain categorizes the praise as polite formality or empty corporate manipulation, completely filtering it out. Your conscious mind never receives the objective truth of your performance. You are trapped inside an insulated cognitive echo chamber where your brain actively deletes all evidence of your brilliance, while hyper-focusing on every micro flaw. ensuring that your internal sense of fraudulence remains completely intact despite an ocean of positive external proof. The severity of this internal fraudulence is heavily compounded by an evolutionary design flaw in how the human brain calculates social hierarchies. Your mind does not calculate your competence in a vacuum. It relies on a continuous background process called social comparison theory, governed by the medial prefrontal cortex. However, this comparison matrix operates on a highly asymmetric dataset. You experience your own internal reality from the inside out, meaning you are intimately aware of all your internal chaos, your messy thoughts, your morning anxieties, and your moments of profound confusion. In contrast, you only experience the external reality of your peers from the outside in. You only see their polished public presentations, their calculated speech, and their curated professional milestones. The medial prefrontal cortex automatically compares your raw, unedited internal blooper reel with everyone else's highly refined highlight reel. The brain detects a massive structural mismatch. It reasons that if everyone else appears calm, structured, and certain while you feel confused and anxious, you must be a uniquely defective outsider who has accidentally infiltrated an elite group. The algorithm of your mind fails to calculate that behind every calm exterior lies the exact same chaotic biological machinery, transforming a universal human limitation into a deeply personal feeling of psychological isolation. To understand why the brain reacts to success with such an intense, agonizing wave of exposure panic, we must evaluate the severe evolutionary penalties of prehistoric tribal life. For over 99% of human history, your survival was entirely dependent on absolute integration within a close-knit hunter-gatherer tribe. Being cast out or ostracized by the group meant certain death by starvation or predation. Within these primitive tribes, social resources and status were tightly regulated by strict dominance hierarchies. A human who claimed a high-status position or consumed premium resources without possessing the physical capability to defend that status faced immediate violent retribution from the dominant members of the group. Claiming unearned status was a high-risk evolutionary gamble. Therefore, the human nervous system developed a highly conservative defense mechanism designed to prevent you from overreaching your biological boundaries. The impostor mechanism was an evolutionary safety valve. It deliberately injected intense anxiety and self-doubt into the consciousness of high achievers to force them to minimize their status, deflect praise, and remain humble. The fear of being exposed today is not a broken psychological design. It is the ancient social defense system of a primitive hominid who is terrified that if they accept too much credit, the rest of the tribe will view them as an arrogant threat and violently cast them out into the wilderness. The persistent feeling of fraudulence is also driven by an artificial neurochemical ceiling created by the clinical structure of perfectionism. Individuals trapped inside the impostor mechanism almost always operate under a rigid cognitive framework known as all-or-nothing thinking. Your brain defines competence not as a spectrum of growth, but as an absolute flawless binary. You believe that you are either a flawless genius who executes tasks perfectly on the first attempt without any effort, or you are a complete failure. When you work on a project and encounter natural friction, confusion, or the need to revise your work, your brain interprets this normal cognitive processing as absolute proof of your lack of natural talent. The prefrontal cortex translates the physical effort required to solve a problem into a sign of structural deficiency, because your brain has set an impossible biological standard where real competence must feel completely effortless. The natural presence of human effort activates your internal threat detection systems. The dopamine reward pathway that should fire upon the completion of the task is completely choked off by a wave of cortisol. You find yourself unable to experience a single drop of satisfaction from your hard-earned victories, because the mere fact that you had to work hard to achieve them convinces your rigid neurochemistry that you are a fake. The long-term danger of living inside this mental speed trap is the severe accumulation of allostatic load caused by maintaining a constant professional mask. When your brain convinces you that your natural self is entirely inadequate and fraudulent, it forces you to build an artificial, highly polished persona to present to the world. You learn to speak, dress, and act with a calculated precision designed to hide your internal chaos from public view. From a neurological perspective, maintaining this persona requires an immense continuous expenditure of executive energy. Your prefrontal cortex is forced to run a constant background program dedicated entirely to impression management and self-monitoring, actively checking your posture, tone, and performance for any sign of weakness. Over months and years of continuous execution, this chronic energy expenditure completely exhausts your nervous system's buffering capacity. The high allostatic load causes a systemic downregulation of your serotonin and dopamine receptors, plunging your mind into a flat gray state of biological burnout. The energy required to keep the mask from slipping becomes so overwhelming that your resilience collapses entirely, forcing you to view your career not as a source of pride, but as an exhausting, high-stakes theatrical performance that you must eventually abandon just to survive. When we systematically evaluate this entire cognitive process through a cold clinical lens, we can perform an objective somatic autopsy on our self-doubt and completely strip it of its psychological terror. The next time you step into a high-level meeting or accept a wave of praise and feel the cold weight of exposure panic settle into your stomach, you must instantly recognize the mechanical order of operations inside your flesh. The racing pulse, the tight chest, and the internal voice telling you that you do not belong are not profound emotional truths. They are not an indication that your credentials are fake, that you are incompetent, or that a catastrophic exposure is imminent. They are simply the physical, predictable consequence of an ancient tribal safety valve firing inside an evolutionary brain that doesn't understand the structure of a modern meritocracy. The terrifying thoughts your mind manufactures during this window are completely empty. They are nothing more than a desperate, fictional script written by an overtaxed prefrontal cortex trying to find an explanation for a raw, mismatched dopamine deficit in your reward circuitry. The thoughts are not insights, they are simply the neurological exhaust produced by a high-performing engine that is struggling to calibrate its own success. Breaking the cycle of chronic performance anxiety requires you to change how you interpret the internal feeling of fraudulence. You cannot stop your rigid cognitive consistency filters from trying to disqualify your success. Your brain is structurally wired to protect its past identity from being rewritten. Your objective is not to wait for the self-doubt to magically disappear before you feel secure, but to change your relationship to the doubt. When the wave of exposure panic hits your chest, you must expect the biological delay. Instead of engaging with the terrifying scenarios your mind creates, your only goal is to look at the tension objectively, accept the unspent cortisol, and say to yourself, "This is just the imposter mechanism. My reward circuitry is catching up to my reality." By removing the moral shame and the mental narrative from the sensation, you give your prefrontal cortex the time it needs to rebuild its memory pathways, update your self-identity, and naturally return your body to a state of calm authority. Thank you for watching this explanation. If you want to understand more about the silent biological mechanics that dictate our daily human struggles, consider subscribing to the channel. This library is a growing archive dedicated strictly to the deep science of why the mind and body operate this way. No trends, no shortcuts, just the objective truth of our shared biology. Explore the rest of the archive to understand your mind, and I will see you in the next breakdown.